I don't know exactly how long these are supposed to be, but I've never had anyone complain about them being too short before. I have had a few complaints the opposite direction in different times in my life, but so do what now? Oh, over here. Gotcha. The cameraman's telling me that I'm standing directly in front of a chandelier, so to move over. Um, so my plan is to this is kind of a tester lesson to see whether the rest of the week I need to adjust for longer or shorter. So having said that, you know you're in trouble when the preacher apologizes before the sermon starts. So the two kingdoms, the belt of truth is what we're going to be looking at tonight, and the breastplate of righteousness, Ephesians 6:14, just the one verse tonight. But this is building upon the lesson that we began this morning, um, which was to be prepared to get ready. And here, just a quick recap of the points from this morning. Paul, directly from the Apostle Paul, he begins by telling us to be strong. He tells us to be strong, primarily because he wants us to understand. He wants all Christians to understand that the Christian life, the Christian walk, is a fight. It requires strength. There's no reason to be strong if there's no difficulty. There's no reason to be strong if strength is not required. So Paul wants to let us know, like, look, you're going to have to be strong. Not strong in a physical sense, even though the Apostle Paul says there is some good to being physically strong. There's so much greater good to being spiritually strong. So that's what he wants us to be. So be strong. Our next point was to wear armor. He talks to us about how we are to be strong. He says to be strong in the Lord. He wants us. He's very specific about that. And in His might, we don't have that might in ourselves. We don't have that strength in ourselves. But then he adds to that. He says we're also to wear armor. So trust in the Lord and put on this armor. Of course, we're not talking about physical armor. This is also spiritual as well. So what is he getting at there? Well, before he gets into talking about the armor, he lets us know who our enemy is. Just know your enemy. Your enemy is the devil. It's not people. It's so easy to get that mixed up. It's not any other entity in the world. It is the devil. The devil and the forces and his forces of evil in this world. So know your enemy. And then the next, know the devil's schemes. Understand that when there are forces of evil that play in the world, those are at play because the devil has put them into play. Okay, and and he gives some description that they are in play in every place of power that we see in this world, on this earth. If where there is a place of power, there is the devil and or demonic activity and evil forces at work within that. We see that in world governments around the world. We see that even at home, even within our own government. We see evil things at play and at practice. And as the day of Christ approaches, we just see things becoming more and more prevalent. We see evil more and more prevalent in our society around us. The last thing he says before he goes into the description of the armor is, know that you can win. He lets us know that do these things and you will be able to resist. Which is super encouraging. Sometimes we feel like there's no hope. Sometimes we get discouraged and feel like we don't really have any real strength. You know, if you ever feel like that, if you ever feel discouraged and you feel like I don't have any real strength, that's actually a good thought. That's a good beginning thought because you don't. Wes, on his own, has no strength, has no thought. But it's like looking out across that valley like David did all those years ago and seeing that giant Goliath. David didn't say, well, you know, I'm very skilled. I'm really tough. I'm real fast. I'm a warrior. I can go down and I don't care how big that guy is. I can go down and take care of that giant. No, what did he say? What did he say instead? He said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God. He understood that he couldn't win, and in and of himself, he was not strong. David said, "The Lord delivered me from the paw of the bear. The Lord delivered me from the lion." This guy doesn't stand a chance, not against me. This guy doesn't stand a chance against the Lord. Paul wants us to understand that as well, that we can win. Okay, so just a couple context things to get us going tonight as well. That was our recap. So Paul's audience is the church in Ephesus. I say that to say it's important to understand that Paul's audience is Christians. You say, well, why does that matter? That matters because Paul's objective in writing what he writes here about the army of God is not to recruit. He's not, and of course, all Scripture on some level is meant to convict us. If you're not a Christian and we hear it, it all has the power to convict and to bring people to a point of salvation. But that's not his point in writing this. His point is not to recruit, but to equip the saints. Paul is most concerned here in Ephesians 6 with Christian usefulness. Usefulness, something that we probably don't talk about a lot. People will put a whole lot of stress into a person becoming a Christian, but then so many times, and not a good thing, that's where the road ends for so many. Well, become a Christian, and then that's it, and never do anything ever again. Don't live the Christian life. Everyone wants to go to heaven. Not everyone wants to follow Jesus. This is what Paul wants the Christian to look like. Now, I know these are physical soldiers that you see on the screen here. He wants you and he wants me to imagine in our Christian lives. He wants us to imagine that we get up every day and we equip ourselves like an actual soldier. But instead of physical armor, we are putting on this spiritual armor. He doesn't want us, see, what so many of us do is this. So many of us, and I'm not picking on reporters or anything like that here, but so many of us, the Lord wants us to look like this, to face our day fully equipped, ready with our armor on. And so many times we might throw on a little helmet, but we're not prepared for the day. We don't have a weapon with us. We don't have we don't have the proper armor. We don't have the proper training. We're just walking around in life hoping for the best. And when bad things come along, we cry out to God, "Why me, Lord? Why me?" And the Lord says through the Apostle Paul, like, "Wes, I warned you. I told you that this is a fight. I told you that your Christian walk is going to be a struggle, that you have to be strong, that it's a battle, and that you need to have armor on." And you don't even think about those things. You just go out and approach your day just hoping for the best and are surprised when things don't turn out your way. Don't be surprised. I told you from the get-go, this is a fight. Let me mix metaphors with you, because Paul loves to teach in metaphors. This is another one of his favorite metaphors here. 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27. Paul says this. He's trying to emphasize the same thing, just a different metaphor. "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified." What Paul is talking about here, Paul isn't talking about, he's not worried about, he's not trying to work for his salvation, for one. Sometimes people will think that he's trying to work towards his salvation. He's not trying to work towards his salvation. His salvation was a free gift from God. Paul explains that to us. He understands that. When Paul says that he's worried that he will be disqualified, he's also not talking about salvation there either. He's not talking about losing his salvation. That is not on Paul's mind. So what is Paul worried about? Paul is worried about not being useful in the kingdom. And what does he say will make him not useful? He says he disciplines his body, makes it his slave, so that after he has preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Paul understands something that we all need to understand, that if there is sin living in my life, and I try to live 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in the, or let's keep with the theme of the VBS, 1 foot in the dark kingdom, 1 foot in the kingdom of light, and I try to live with my sin and with my God, Paul says, you know what, Wes, you're gonna teach people, but they're gonna witness your life, and they're gonna witness the words that come out of your mouth, and they're gonna say, I don't buy that. And they're not gonna buy it. They're not gonna buy into Jesus. They're not gonna believe what I have to say because they see that inconsistency in my life. They see me saying, be serious about following Christ, and then they look at my life and they say, that guy's not seriously following Christ. I mean, why would I want to be like that? So Paul was very concerned about not only his usefulness, but the usefulness of Christians. Because after all, that's why God saved us. Well, God saved us, since someone says, well, didn't God save us because he loved us? Yes, he did. But you know what? I love my kids no matter what. But I want them to do good things. God is the same way. I mean, to a much greater scale. God says, Wes, I don't just love you, and I didn't just save you. I saved you for a purpose. I saved you to do these good things. Do those good things. Next, so our first point tonight is to be committed. There's only 2 points tonight. This is the first one. Be committed. Ephesians 6:14, introducing our text tonight. Half of it. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth. Okay, so there's a little bit of disconnect on a cultural standpoint. We don't hear about people girding their loins these days, but I've got a nice demonstration thing that on the screen here in just a minute. So we'll get there in a second. Now, I want you to understand this. Paul saw soldiers every day, and so did everyone else. You know, Paul was a Roman prisoner for many years, and Paul witnessed Roman citizens every single day of his life. And so did everyone else that lived in that region. So when Paul is talking about, he's imagining this soldier, he's not having to use his imagination. And he's not using language that all the people in the area don't understand. Everyone understood that a soldier who had their loins girded was a soldier that was ready for action, a soldier that was ready for battle. When you saw a soldier that had his robe tied up, see, I should have had the chart already. See, I'm already getting myself out of order here. Just hang with me. I'll get there in just a second. When you saw a soldier who had his loins girded, that's going to make more sense in a second. That was a soldier that you knew was prepared to go into battle. So what did a soldier look like who didn't have his loins girded? Well, soldiers wore these long tunics. Basically, everyone did. It was basically like a dress, the dress that goes all the way to the ground, and it had basically a hole for your head, and it had a hole for your arms, had holes for your arms, and they wore that. And when they were going to fight, they would gather that thing up because you couldn't go to war in a dress, right? All the enemy would have to do is grab your dress, pull it over your head, and you're done for. Or if you got it hung up in the briars or whatever when you were trying to run into battle, you're done for. So these guys had to make sure that thing was secure. Well, how did they secure it? Well, they tied it up, but they also secured it with a belt. That belt, which Paul is going to get at here, that belt of truth, that is what the soldier used to not only secure their garment, but to also they attached all their weapons on it. They also, on that sash or that belt that they wore around their waist, they also would have things written on there about their military service, their military conquest, all the battles they'd been in. It was a show of you could look at a soldier's sash, and you could tell that belt that they had on around them. You could tell where they'd fought, where they'd been, what honors they'd received. It was all part of that. Paul wants us to understand what everyone then just understood instantly. Nobody wins a battle that's not prepared to go into battle. So that's the first thing that we do. Also, don't confuse this belt of truth with the sword of the Spirit. The sword of the Spirit meaning the Word of God. It's more than that. Putting on truth here is more than content, okay? It's attitude, it's personal integrity. Think of it like this. It's being true. So to put on truth is to have personal integrity. It's to be a true person, to not have anything false in your life. And it's to have that attitude of, I'm in this fight to win this fight. To be committed to truth is to be committed to spiritual battle. Now, that's the only question I have worked in tonight, but I'll turn it to you all to answer. Why do I say that to be committed to truth is to be committed to spiritual battle? What do you think? Yeah, Satan's the great deceiver. Truth wins out in the end. Yeah, absolutely. He does. That truth will come out in the end. What else? What else do you think? Do truth tellers, let me say it a different way. How are truth tellers in our society treated by mainstream society? Not real well. Not real well. To speak up for the truth, to stand for the truth, is to be committed to battle. Because if you are a truth teller in this world that we live in, the battle will come to you whether you ask for it, whether you look for it or not. It is there. And Paul never says to go looking for a fight. I don't think that we should go looking for fights. But you don't have to look for a fight if you're a truth teller. You tell the truth. You share God's truth with people in this world, and you will be embattled. If you don't believe me, just give it a try. You'll find out real quick. Here's a little demonstration I have. I love what it says up here in this little thing. It says, the art of manliness. How to gird up your loins. A neat little thing I found online. First, it says, the tunic wouldn't allow you to do heavy labor or fight in battle, necessitating the girding of one's loins. Number 2, first, hoist the tunic up so that all the fabric is above your knees. This will give you mobility. Step 3, gather all the extra material in front of you so that the back of the tunic is snug against your backside. Step 4, once the excess fabric is gathered in front, pull it underneath and between your legs to your rear. Let me step down here for a second because I can't see that high. This feels much like wearing a diaper. Step 5, gather half of the material in each hand, bringing it back around to the front. Step 6, finally, tie your 2 handfuls of material together, and you're all set for both battle and some hard labor. Go forth and be ye men and gird up your loins. I thought that was pretty neat. So anyway, so that's the way that's literally how the soldier girded up their loins. But then you see the guy in the thing, he already has his belt on, but they would actually take that. Not only would they tie it, soldiers, but they would also tuck it in and tie it around with their belt as well to secure all that in. You ever heard the expression tying up all loose ends? This is what that is. This is tying up all loose ends. And when we say we're tying up all loose ends, what do we mean by that? We mean we're getting ready for something. We're preparing for something. And to a soldier, that meant tying up all loose ends, meant preparing for battle. Jude chapter 1, verse 3 says this, "Beloved, while I was making every effort to write you about our common salvation, I felt the necessity to write to you, appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints." I love that language there. And this is what Paul has in mind as well, that we contend earnestly for the faith. Like I said, you don't have to go looking for a fight, but when you have an opportunity to share gospel truth, to share biblical truth with people, and you share it, Paul expresses, and it's expressed here in Jude 1:3, contend earnestly. It means make a fight, not a physical fight, but make a fight for the truth. Stand up for the truth. Ephesians 6:14 again, back to where we left off. So Paul is saying a few more things. Paul is saying, if you are content with your current state, and if you are not growing spiritually, and if you are not living out your call daily, and if you are content with some sin in your life, and if you are not actively fighting to be less like yourself and more like Jesus, how can you claim to be a follower of Christ? Now here's the thing. You may be a follower of Christ. Well, what Paul was getting at was an epidemic in his world, and is an epidemic in our world as well. That not all who claim the name Christian live a life that follows Christ. They might follow Christ a little, but Paul says, no, think about your life as if you're a soldier. You know, say you join the United States military. Doesn't matter which service, you just join the military. Pick any branch to do, and they don't say, well, here's we have this uniform here, and we'd really appreciate it if you would wear this, right? No, and they don't say, hey, we've got some things we want you to do, and if you feel up to it, we'd like you to do these things. We have some exercises it'd be really good for you to do, and we'd really like you to do these things if you'd like. No, that's not the way a soldier behaves. A soldier lives for their duty. And that's what Paul's really trying to get at to the heart of the people. Imagine that you are a soldier of the Lord. Your duty is to serve him and to please him. He says in it's either 1st or 2nd Timothy, I can't remember which now, but he says to Timothy, a soldier does not entangle himself in civilian matters. I mean, a soldier doesn't get caught up in things in this life that don't have anything to do with the Lord, because the soldier's aim is to please the Lord. The second part of Ephesians 6:14, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Did I skip a slide? Let me see. I think I may have a slide out of order. The next point, if I somehow lost it, the next point is holy living. Holy living. It's our second and our only next point. And having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Holy living, I want you to understand this, holy living is the breastplate of righteousness. if there is any unaddressed sin in your life, understand that is and will be a chink in your armor. That is a place in your life that you are vulnerable for attack. Having unaddressed sin in your life, that is the equivalent of drinking poison and hoping that you'll get stronger, and hoping that things will just get better for you, and hoping that you'll grow spiritually. Don't expect any of those things if you are cuddling and caressing and courting sin in your life. You must deal with that. You must deal with that as a soldier would deal with it. Eliminate it. Kill it. Get it out of your life. Cut it away. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, the author of Hebrews says, "Therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance." This is the same thing, just said a different way. Let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So the author of Hebrews has the same thing in mind that Paul has in mind here. It says, imagine that your life, and this is another metaphor, of course, but imagine that your life is a race. Now, if you are in a race, don't, and you're on this path, and you look off to the side and you see another path, but this path is loaded with briars and obstacles. Paul says, the author of Hebrews says, don't deliberately go down that path. That's a description of what sin is in your life. You're running this race, stay on the path. And you wouldn't go on, you wouldn't get in a race and carry, a great big backpack and 2 big duffel bags full of stuff either. You would get rid of that. That's the way the author of Hebrews says that's what sin is like. That's what living the Christian life with sin in your life is like. It says, shuck that stuff off. Get rid of those extra weights so that you can run the course that the Lord has set before you. Laying aside every encumbrance is the equivalent of girding your loins. Get ready for battle. That's what girding your loins amounts to. Getting ready for battle. Tying up those loose ends. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I did get out of order a little bit, so let's, okay. I apologize for that. Just roll with me, church. Next point, be righteous. Be righteous. I think I said I changed it a second ago, but that's actually what the second point was supposed to be. And having put on the breastplate of righteousness. So having prepared for battle, Paul now says, protect your most vital organ. Now, there's a lot of vital organs that a breastplate covers. It, covers from head to your waist. But he says, but when you put that breastplate on, the main thing that he has in mind that has to be protected, your most vital of organ, is your heart. There are some organs that can be damaged and you can still live through them. There's some organs you can even have removed and you can live through that. Some of you may even have that done. But guess what? If that heart stops beating, you're done. No one is living on this earth with a heart that's not beating. So put on that breastplate of righteousness. And what protects the heart? Righteousness does. Because if you want to protect your heart in the spiritual armor that you have on, you protect your heart with righteousness. I don't want you to confuse this either with imputed righteousness. Imputed righteousness being the righteousness that is given to us through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. When Christ died on the cross, when he shed his blood on the cross, and when he was resurrected, and you came to believe in him, and you came to follow him, God gave you the righteousness of Christ. That's what we call imputed righteousness. He became your righteousness. So that's what saves us, this imputed righteousness. We already have this, all right? That's not what Paul has in mind. Say, okay, so if it's not imputed righteousness, then what does he have in mind? What does he mean? he helps us out a little bit more in Philippians 2, verse 12. Paul says, "So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure." So, when Paul says here, to work out your salvation, sometimes people will misinterpret that as, well, Paul's meaning to work for your salvation. No, he's not. He doesn't mean that at all. We know he doesn't mean that. So why do we know that? Because look what verse 13 says. It is God who is at work in you. God's not at work in anyone who is not saved. Period. I mean, his influence, the Holy Spirit may be influencing a person. The Lord may be working around that person's life, trying to steer them to make that decision to choose him. But he's not actively working in the life of anyone who's not saved. So what does Paul mean when he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling? He answers that also in verse 13. God is at work in you. What is God doing in me? Now that I'm saved, he's working in me to do his will and to do his work. For what purpose? For his good pleasure. That's what brings pleasure to the Lord, when I live a righteous and a holy life. It's because I have been saved that I work out my salvation with fear and trembling. It's in gratitude to God. It's the workings of salvation in my life that produce my working for God's good pleasure. 2 Corinthians 7:1, Paul says, "Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God." There's two elements that we see there. Number one, the cleansing ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit. Getting that sin, like I said before, getting that sin out of your life. The flip side of that coin, you get the sin out of your life, then you perfecting holiness in the fear of the Lord. What does that mean? That means righteous living. Righteous living. That's what putting the breastplate of righteousness on is. The breastplate of righteousness. That's what putting it on is living a holy life, living a righteous life, a life that is full of the Lord's good works. Hey, that was our class for tonight. So since we do have some time,